Well, here we are, Renee. Another episode. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing great, but this is a kind of a weird one for me because your video isn't working. So I'm kind of just staring at your face here on the Zoom, talking to myself more than usual. So that's a little weird, but I'm doing awesome. But you're out and about. So where are you today before we get started?
I am in a museum in Meeker, Colorado. We dove in here to walk around, and the curator was nice enough to say, "Hey, you can use our internet. The county just upgraded it, and you can just go ahead and do your podcast from here." But it still wasn't quite enough bandwidth for my video to go out, Renee. So I apologize. But this is what we're talking about today: rural frontier.
This is what we're talking about. And when it's fun though, because this is the job we do with the people we love to work with. So it is fun. You're trying to connect from rural America. And actually, to be fair, this is some of those connectivity issues we talk about being a barrier for some to get mental health help. So you're experiencing it in real time just to do a podcast. So, but before we get started, we always talk about the farm, and I hear you have a new, really interesting idea, farming that came from Colorado. Tell us all about it.
Well, I mean, Renee, we're spending a lot of time in Colorado on this project, and we're immersed in the ranch culture. And, we had a meeting on Monday at the Department of Agriculture, a meeting with the state of Colorado around the project we're doing. And in the parking lot, there were 50 of these white trucks, and they all said one word on them: brand inspector. And I hadn't even thought about brand inspectors. And so, when cattle run on public lands, they all have to be branded. And every ranch, every owner of a ranch has their own personal brand. This goes back to the 1800s, where you would brand your livestock to show ownership, and that's what insurance is based upon. That's how you get your cattle back if there's a rustler to stealing. And so in the state of Colorado, those brand inspectors still have to go out and inspect all of the livestock, which made me think, Renee, if we're going to be rural, we need our own RPP brand. And so I'm designing a brand as we speak, so that we can have that. And we'll use that image on all of our materials. Those
Mm.
business cards got to be reprinted, though, because we need our
Ah,
brand in the corner.
mm.
I know you'd love this idea.
So much, so much. So, all of you listeners out there, Jason does what he calls strategic thinking when he's out and about, especially hanging out with Brent. And I can tell they've been on the road 3 weeks now in a row, and that's too much time togetherness. So they come up with grand ideas. But today we're actually going to be talking about community. And it's really fun because this is the exact type of community that we like to talk about, we like to work with. We're talking rural community and really talking about what it's like to be rural and really what it means and how do you build that community and to have a place like this that's willing to open their arms for Jason and to let him use their Wi-Fi is exactly what we're talking about. It's people helping strangers, helping their neighbors, all that kind of thing. So let's talk community. So, what about community, Jason, did you really want to highlight now that you're way out there in the rural part of the world?
Well, I think it's a good reminder. And as I thought about, kind of what we're talking about today, it's really just all about relationships. And, doing community building is really challenging work because, Renee, we've been talking for years about social isolation. We've been talking a lot about the impacts of substance use, the impacts, going back to COVID, how it changed the way we interact with each other, people working from home, and all of that is continuing to have huge impacts just on how we interact with people in our local environments. And so community takes on a lot of different words, but we're seeing firsthand, especially in rural areas, how those connection points that used to be there to support and protect each other just aren't there anymore. And that's creating a lot of challenges with all the different systems that we regularly interact with.
So I think about how do we go about building community in rural communities? I know it's different. So today's day and age, a lot of people are, really struggling with being isolated and being separate. And that can happen anywhere, right? It's not just in rural communities, but there really can be a greater challenge. And some people moved rural on purpose to be more isolated, right? I've got a friend who says he wants to live out in basically where there's, what does he always tell me? Something about more something than people by a
Yes.
long way. And because he wants to have that private house, the private drive where he doesn't have to deal with neighbors and whatever. But so sometimes that's designed. But when it comes to healthcare and it comes to, crises or emergencies, they still need coverage. So That's always a challenge when you're thinking about being isolated, whether even if it was by choice, like how do you still get those basic needs met? So what are you guys doing in Craig that kind of works around this conversation about building community?
Yeah, it's really, a lot of people say when they come out here, they want to be alone and not be around people. But then they get here and they realize how much they miss that. And then they don't know how to meet that need. And so then that's when a lot of times, people turn to substances to cope or other types of things. Really what we're looking at in the work that we do here is thinking about how do we create connections again? Because people have kind of forgotten how to connect, and especially when a community goes through a traumatic event. And so I think about the disaster work we've done of, like when a tornado goes through Iowa or there's a flood, how people come together and help each other out.
Right.
Well, we're seeing that in workforce here in the state of Colorado. Some industries are completely shutting down. Specifically what we're looking at is the mining industry, power plants that still use coal are currently closing down and people are losing their identity. They've worked in those plants for generations, and that's the only industry. And so people need that connection to have hope for what's next. Where can I find new work? What business could I start up that meets a need in my community? And when we get so isolated and insulated, it's easy to lose hope. And so we see a lot of that when we travel around in some of these rural areas because the economy is kind of in the dumps. The rural economy is a lot of folks in these areas, they rely on hunting and ranching and have some cattle on the side to do those things. And so the challenges can seem overwhelming.
Yeah, I know. And so when we talked about this, when we had a recent podcast with your friends that do the Rural Well podcast and talking about like how, when agriculture is struggling, all levels of all sorts
Yeah.
of things struggle. And then you add these kind of challenges where complete industries are changing or, modernizing or whatever, you just lose a lot of connections. And so people that maybe you've worked with for generations now are going to have to find something different or move to a new community or all of those things. So that has to be really tough on top of all the other challenges that we're facing right now with prices. So, what do we do about it? Like, how do we build community when you're in those places where you have such change or you have, maybe lots of windshield time? How do you go about doing that?
Well, I mean, one of the things that we're thinking a lot about and we're helping people to do is get people connected, get people some training, and get them re-engaged, reconnected with each other. So we're really working with a lot of leaders within the industry to take people to coffee, go to breakfast, create those natural connections that are grassroots. We can't just go in and do a training, and we see this a lot in the work. We see this a lot when we go around to different states that we're going to go do a training and it's a one and done training. And guess what changes after a one and done training? Maybe people get a little bit more knowledge and information, but it
Mhm.
doesn't change behavior.
Mhm.
People need ongoing coaching and support to change that behavior to continue to get out, and they need that little push, right? And so that's really what we're designing is we're designing and equipping people to pick up some tools to think about, well, what could I do to be a little more intentional about reaching out to people. We talk a lot about don't ever, say, "Hey, how you doing?" if you don't really want to sit with somebody for half an hour and unpack how they're really doing. And so that's what's so exciting about what we get to do. We went to a small mercantile shop where it's a print shop
Mm.
and she sells shaving lotions and baby clothes and just kind of old school mercantile shop. And she told us that she was really glad she took over the print shop 5 years ago because that's the only thing keeping her business alive today because no one is coming in and shopping. The last 9 months have been the slowest of her career, and she's lived in that community her whole life. We had to get some things printed for an event we were going to hand out some half pagers with our QR code on them to our initiative, and the copy place we went to do that. She also said that they're really worried about the future is going to bring. That they're losing the tax base of the largest industry in the entire county, and that's going to
Wow.
have a ripple effect on them as well. So it's not just those directly impacted and losing their job; it's everybody in the community is having increased anxiety and stress over the future. And you know how long it takes to bring new industry in or to think about what's going to happen. And so that's putting a lot of pressure on people. And there's also a lot of grief because some people are just up and leaving. And so, friends are losing friends that they've known for their entire lives, or they just are increasingly feeling more hopeless about the situation. And so we've just been lucky enough to have so many conversations with so many great people as we go around and kind of tying it back to community, Renee. You know how many of the folks that we've talked to have a connection back to Iowa? I think we're running like 50% right now.
Oh,
It's
wow.
been really amazing being 1,200 miles from where we live, and we'll go up to someone and they'll say, "Oh, my cousin Susie lives in Clarinda," and so we're like, "We know where that is." They're like, "Nobody knows where that is." I'm like, "Well, we do," and so it's just been so much fun.
Yeah. I think about here local to where we are in the Des Moines area of Iowa, we had a meat packing plant shut down. And that's a little
Yeah,
bit like what you're talking about. Now they didn't shut down all plants, so they could have moved to a new community, but it made massive impact. And one of the big areas maybe we haven't talked about yet was school with the number of
yeah.
children. When the meat packing plant closed, families had to move to go find other work or whatever, or waiting, like you're saying, to something else comes to the plant or something. And so it impacts like how many teachers a school district needs. So it's a ripple effect across a bunch of different industries. And so it's not just your shops and your people because the tax base is moving. It is other jobs because how many people are in a school keeps a school open. Even if it's a consolidated school, you have to consider how many students you have to keep it working, to keep it moving. And so a lot of times somebody working in the factory or the mine, maybe their spouse is doing a different job and you could lose both. And so it really is a challenge as things shift. So you're talking about, can you just kind of describe, like, you're in the town of Meeker. I don't even know that I've ever heard of this town. So what is it like in that town? Is there a stoplight, or is it stop signs? How big do you think? Is there an equivalency that you can think of?
Well, it's hard, and I think I haven't appreciated what frontier actually is, and so sometimes we use rural and frontier interchangeably, and I don't think until you've really been in a frontier area do you understand the difference between frontier and rural. Because in Iowa, we're rural, and even that community you just talked about that lost the meatpacking plant, they were only about 30 miles from Des Moines, right? So you could jump on a four-lane highway and get somewhere else pretty quickly.
Yep.
Um, and where we're at right now in Meeker is it's almost 4 hours from Denver, 5 hours east of Salt Lake City, and about an hour and a half north of Grand Junction. Those would be the three towns surrounding it. So we are very much in an isolated area. We drove an hour to get here from Craig, and we didn't pass a single gas station.
Oh, wow.
So when we say it's not like you just run somewhere else. This is a very self-sufficient community. I think it's 5 or 6 thousand people live here, and pretty much you got to take care of yourself, especially in the winter. That everything you need, you have to be self-sufficient. And so when we say people here are fiercely independent, we really mean that because it's not a culture of asking for help. The expectation is you just have to figure out how to make it work. And it's very tight knit in some ways, but in some ways it's very isolating because there's a great stigma of asking for help. And so, our joke when we're out here is people ask for help if they need a refrigerator moved, but
Mm.
people don't ask for help if they're really suffering or struggling with something else. And that's part of that frontier. We see that in agriculture, we see that in ranching, of you just power through it even at your own detriment.
Yeah. I think about when you're thinking about frontier, I think about our trip to Alaska. And in some ways, that's probably closer to where you are now, a lot of the
Yes,
conversation. Now, granted, you and I were in Anchorage and the surrounding area that was more of the only bigger communities in that state. But when you listen to people talk about what it was like to get to places when they needed help, it sounds a lot like what you're saying now. It really is that
completely,
frontier, those miles and miles
completely.
where you may only can get there by plane or by vehicle. It takes a very long time. So that sounds really familiar. For the audience, do you know what a frontier and rural population, like how do they define that? And when you're thinking frontier?
Yeah, so when we say frontier, the definition, and I'll be honest, I don't know what definition I pulled, but it's less than 6 people per square mile,
Oh,
right? And so when we think about access and broadband, I didn't have internet on my phone driving here for part of the time. As we drove from Denver up to Craig, we drove this time. We didn't fly directly into Steamboat Hayden. And so when you're going through the mountains and you're going through some of these valleys, and Meeker here is in a valley, you lose phone signal a lot. And so when
yeah.
we think about telehealth, there are limitations to telehealth. And sometimes, I don't know if I fully appreciate or have understood completely how great those limitations are. Because just like when we're trying to podcast, if my video is choppy, how can I see a professional, whether it's therapy or a psychiatrist, that connection has to be sound. And so there are a great deal of limitations in these areas. Even I'm in a county building that has a new mesh Wi-Fi network, and it says I have full signal, but there's just only so much capacity in these
Yeah.
areas for internet to come and go. And so there's real barriers, Renee.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So you've done a lot now, and I know like, one of the things you've gotten to do while you're on these trips out there is like you got to tour the power plant. What other things have you liked to do or to see? And like, what are you guys doing when you're in these really rural communities? What are you doing to spend your extra time when you're not talking to people? Then what else?
Well, we're always talking to people. That's part of the thing. There's sometimes I just want to stop talking to people, I'll be honest, because we do a lot of talking to people. We experience the local, we go to the local museums. We try to understand the culture of the community because that's really important. But the most important thing we do is eat really good food, Renee, because we
Mm,
have had some of the best restaurants we've ever been to. Because when there's not very many restaurants, the ones that are there are the ones people go to and they're good.
that's cool.
Because it's homemade cooking. I just left Clark's by all places here in Beaker, and it was probably the best hamburger I've ever had.
Wow.
Um, they probably went out and slaughtered the cow last night. I don't know. It was fresh.
It's probably grass fed and all that because it gets to run around on all that open ground. He
Oh,
probably had a brand on his backside before you ate it.
there's
Of
cattle grazing right up to the city limits. There's probably cattle
course.
in town here. They're just wandering around. It's
Oh
fine.
goodness, that's so fun. Well, yeah, I know. You guys call back in, and I think I talked to Brent a couple nights ago, and he's like, even Jason's tired of talking, and I'm like, well, that says something because
It's a
that's
fact.
Brent's a lot faster at being done talking, a lot faster than you are. So if you're getting to the end of your talking, that's a lot of talking.
We actually have open hours in a local coffee shop that has a big dining room table in a back room that we reserve. And today it's funny because if you sit somewhere long enough, people come in and say, "What are you all doing here in our community?" So today, true story. We're sitting in the coffee shop. There's our second morning in the coffee shop because we had said, "Hey, we're going to be there tomorrow too if anybody still wants to come and see us," because we had a whole bunch of people yesterday. And a woman came up to us as we were sitting there today. We were getting other project work done. And she goes, "Hey, have you guys have been in here quite a bit, haven't you? Who exactly are you guys?" And so she ends up, she was the owner of the coffee shop. And she goes, "My husband noticed on the cameras, you guys were in there a long time yesterday." And so we're like, "We're sorry, we're meeting with people." And so she goes, "No, you're welcome here all the time. Let us know when you want the room." But it was
Awesome.
really funny because if you wait long enough, people will just come to you and say, "Hey, outsider, what are you doing in our community?" And just start asking
Yeah.
questions.
I have the opposite story for you. You haven't heard this one, but I just went and traveled to New Mexico with girlfriends, and we too were in another community. And it wasn't quite as rural, but we were staying was really rural. And we were in this coffee shop, and this very eccentric looking lady was there. And my friends were like, "Oh, she has to be an author. We should talk to her." And as a matter of fact, she was not. And I could not contain myself. The joy that I had for what endured the next conversation that happened, I was very excited. And I think we heard about a car being towed that had all of her worldly belongings in it, which
Oh,
actually explains a lot
yeah,
more about the eccentric nature of that situation. And as we were leaving, my friend just says, "Renee's sitting here saying, 'I told you so. That's why I don't talk to strangers.'" And I was just dying
yeah.
laughing. I was like, and she was delightful. And I think her name was Sue. Delightful. But
Oh,
yes. And it's fun and we were the outsiders in that scenario. And you could tell one of my friends from Minnesota, one of them's from Alabama, and myself. So when my friend from Alabama speaks and you're in New Mexico, people come running. They want to know, what are
hmm
you doing here? Who are you? Why are you
hmm
here? So yeah, we
Well,
enjoy that. But small towns, they really like it. They're like, "Hey, you're
uh,
new. What are you doing?"
I think there's a key element here, though. And one of the things that, we've always done this, Renee, but you don't go do work in another community without asking to be invited in.
Right.
And so we're really cognizant about that in everything we do, that we're not here as subject matter experts. We're here to learn from the people that are here and design this project around them. And that's really what the state has asked us to do. But we're very intentional about these conversations and about learning from other people and taking all of that information in. And I think that's a mistake so many people make. So many consultants make that mistake that they come in and say, "Here's a thing, just figure it out and make it fit within this." We've talked about those rubber stamps. You go in and cookie cutter approach, and that doesn't work. It's not effective. And usually that's rejected. And especially in these rural and frontier communities, that's going to be rejected before it even starts.
Right. And that's one of the principles that you and I built this business on about being rural. And if if you remember when you first started, you're like, oh, I don't like long car rides. Oh, I don't like, but yeah, it went,
And
that's been
here
the
I
job.
am.
And here you are. But you're really getting into it because this is the business I dreamed of, because it's us going to the people where they are to meet them where they're at, to help them with the help they need. And it's so different. Like, and so we are different than other consulting companies because that's how we designed it. Because you and I both know what rural means, and we're getting to know better what frontier means as we go along our journey. And so people need us to come to them. They're not just going to magically figure out who we are or come find us. That's not going to work. And so, it has been a fantastic. I just loved all the stories about all the things that you do. Well, today my self-care, recovering politician self-care policy really is about changing locations when you need to, and kind of the general principle is being flexible. Two parts today. We had to change locations. Jason's had to try to work to see if we could even get a podcast to you. And then secondly, you don't know if the Wi-Fi is going to work. So you have to be flexible, and you may have to shift. You may have to get a different perspective, a different point of view, be flexible, make it work, make it change. And so for those of you that tried to watch this on YouTube, we're really sorry because you only saw my face, and I'm not very exciting if I'm not laughing at Jason, but his face is all not even moving. It's no fun. But we tried with the video, and boy, you'd have really hated that. So we're grateful for the opportunity. So Jason, what are you learning about being flexible when you're really out in the middle of nowhere? You probably can't even work when you're on your drive or satellite radio or
Well,
anything else.
I was driving this trip even. So
Oh,
I was
okay.
taking my turn driving. I won't tell you what kind of car we have because it was beautiful driving through the mountains. BMW. And so we had a very enjoyable trip. Now, I don't remember what the question was, but I want to leave you with this, Renee,
Okay.
that we will add in the show notes the picture of what was behind me. And that is actually a two-headed calf that lived for 6 hours in 1948 is stuffed and mounted in this museum behind me. And so I
Ooh.
don't know where else you're going to find that in a museum. But
Oh,
I'll make sure we have that for you so
that'll
you
be
can
that'll be your next
take that
newsletter
all in.
photo. I can't wait.
It might be. Yeah.
Oh no. All right. I'm so sorry in advance, everybody, if you have to see that. Right. Today we were talking about community. Jason's out on the road. We couldn't even get a video signal, which is totally the normal way it is when we work really remote and rural and frontier. And we love doing it. And we're going out talking about how to build community. And some of the key things just to know is you do have to talk to people, and you have to be available and go where the people are. We talked about, in the past, we've talked about, the path that people take is where you should show up. And in this case, that's what Brent and Jason are doing. They're out there where the people are, changes in industry, and they're trying to help by making sure people can be connected and deal with that loss and that grief and the things that they may be feeling through the transition. And so that's what's really important. So before we go, though, make sure you follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube. And if you could leave us a positive review, we'll send you a prize. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.